This is my laptop which is running Arch Linux for the past 3 years, but I have not always used Arch Linux. The first 2 years were funny and interesting for me. I mean, look at this setup. No CPU case, 2-core CPU and 2 GB RAM lying on the table. I was running Ubuntu on it. It was a messy but working setup. Now after using Linux for nearly half a decade now, I have become a calm and composed Arch Linux user from a messy and cool acting Kali Linux user. I have learned from how Linux system boots to how it manages programs, but I'm not going to bore you with technical detail. So just chill around while I share my Linux story. Back in 2016 or 17, there was a Wi-Fi network around me which I wanted access to, but I did not knew the password. So I did some Google search and found that I can use a dictionary, a password dictionary and Kali Linux to try and crack the Wi-Fi password. So I did. I live booted into Kali Linux and I started cracking the Wi-Fi network for password. Unfortunately, I did not had a luck cracking the password of the Wi-Fi, but it was my first exposure to Linux. I started wondering about what is it that I was not able to do in Windows, but I can do it in this operating system. What is it? So I started exploring, but not heavily. I had merely learned about Linux from 2017 to 2021, but in 2021 to 2022, I learned quite a lot. I was running the same computer, but as a separate piece of hardware because in 2021, I got the laptop. So the computer was running Ubuntu. I had some containers running on it, and I was using the hard drive as a storage server. So then I joined my college in 2022, and between those, I was still using Windows, but I was tinkering with Linux in WSL. Everything changed in 2022. I joined college and I met a friend who was already using Linux for a couple of years now. So he suggested me to install Arch Linux and he helped me to install Arch Linux on my system. And I think the decision of installing Arch Linux on my system as a daily driver was the best decision I could have. So I still thank that friend for helping me install Arch Linux on my system. Before 2022, I was merely using Linux, but after 2022, I daily drive Linux and now it has been almost 4 years and most of the learning has happened in these 4 years. Now fast forward to now, from the past couple of days I have been trying different kind of Linux distribution, Arch Linux, Ubuntu, NixOS, Debian. Why? To find out what other Linux distribution had to offer and what are the differences, and also because I was bored with my own setup. So I will share you what are the differences between them and why I like one over the other, and at the end of the video I will give my personal opinion if you are someone who is new to Linux or is starting Linux. Since I'm using Arch Linux, it is already clear to me it is the best Linux distribution. We will talk about it later in the video, but first, before we talk about any other Linux distribution, we need to understand release cycle in order to compare them. Release cycle is nothing but how often a Linux distribution ships the new version of their software. For example, Ubuntu has 6 months of release cycle, so that means every 6 months Ubuntu releases its new software release with new updates and new software, and similar to Fedora and NixOS. But in case of Debian, it is 2 years, so every 2 years it releases their new version of Debian. For example, Debian 12 to 13, it will take 2 years. And in case of Arch Linux, it is a rolling release. That means as soon as there is any update in any software, it is available to Arch Linux distribution. So every piece of software has its source code which is built into the actual software and pushed into a package repository. From that package repository, the Linux distribution can pull that software. So every Linux distribution has their own package registry. So in case of Ubuntu, every 6 months, any update that has been occurred in any software will be accumulated throughout this period of 6 months, and at the end of the 6 month the packages will be made available to the distribution. And in case of Arch Linux, which is rolling release, as soon as there is any update in the source code or let's say the software, it is built and pushed to the package registry of Arch Linux and it is immediately made available to Arch Linux distribution. So this is how release cycle and packaging work. So now that we know every Linux distribution has their own release cycle, so if you want a stable system, then you would choose Debian because it has a very stable release 2 years. But remember that you will not get the bleeding edge features of every software. It will take 2 years to get the latest software. But in case of Arch Linux, you will get the latest software, the latest release every time it is available, but it has its own downside that if there is any breaking changes or if there is anything that is buggy, then your system will behave in an unstable way. So with Arch Linux, you get the bleeding edge latest software, but it may or may not be stable. But with Debian, you do not get the latest software, but whatever you receive will be stable because it has been tested and tried and integrated throughout the period of 2 years. I personally started with Ubuntu. It was a very popular and it is very popular Linux distribution and easy to install, get up and running. But But there was one thing that I did not like. It comes with a lot of pre-installed software, which of course I do not use all of them, so they were bloatware to me. I usually like to configure my system with whatever I require and nothing else. And later on, I got to know about Arch Linux, which allows you to install from ground up by selecting each packages that you want. So no bloatware. Later on, I installed Arch Linux and started using it. Ubuntu is one of the most popular and beginner-friendly Linux distributions developed by Canonical. It is based on Debian and focuses on ease of use, stability, and update every 6 months compared to 2 year in Debian. Ubuntu comes with GNOME desktop environment by default and provide a large set of software ecosystem throughout its package registry. Because of its large community, it is easy to find support for it on online, but it lacks a central documentation. Ubuntu is widely used by beginners, developers, and enterprise as well. It also offers long-term support release that receives update and security patches for several years, making it suitable for both personal and professional use. And I think if you already have some knowledge of Linux, like using terminal and basic concepts, then you should start using Ubuntu, but later on you have better option to choose from. Fedora is a Linux distribution sponsored by Red Hat and developed by the community-driven Fedora project. Fedora Workstation uses the GNOME-based desktop environment by default, as well as you can choose KDE version as well. It focuses on providing polished experience for developers. Fedora is also very stable, and it also offers various flavors of it like workstation, server, IoT, and atomic desktop variant as well. NixOS. It is a unique Linux distribution built around Nix package manager, which uses a purely functional and declarative approach to system configuration. Instead of manually installing and configuring software, the entire system, including the packages installed, services, and system setting, is defined under a configuration file called configuration.nix. This design makes NixOS highly reproducible and suitable for advanced users, developers, and infrastructure environment where consistent system configuration is important. It is also the largest repository of software. One good thing about NixOS is that they have documentation pages. It is not very extensive and large, but hey, at least it has some. Arch Linux. Now, my personal favorite. One thing I would like to bring up front is the documentation of Arch Linux. It is the most useful and maintained documentation and covers wide range of information. Now think about it. If you do not have a documentation to read about how to manage your system, how are you supposed to do it? Test, trials, community? It doesn't seem to me the best idea. So I admire Arch for its documentation. Another thing is AUR, Arch User Repository. Packages are distributed according to Linux distribution. For example, packages for Debian-based system are shipped in .deb format. For Fedora, it's RPM, and you cannot install one package from one Linux distribution to another without doing extra work of extracting and rearranging things to the desired system. And this work is done in AUR for Arch Linux. Community build scripts and packages which can be used from one Linux distribution to another Linux distribution. For example, if there is a package distributed in .deb, then AUR will contain a repository where the instruction on how to convert the .deb format to Arch Linux specific format and install it. And last but not the least, it is a rolling release Linux distribution, so you get the latest and greatest of every software. But it also means that if there is any bug, you will be prone to that bug. And another thing is installation. Arch Linux installation is very bare bone. I mean, it gives you all the flexibility to choose each and every packages that you want in your system and start from the very base ground. So installation can become sometimes tedious because you have to do everything in terminal as compared to other Linux distribution which offers graphical based installation method. But luckily we have another distribution called CachyOS, which is also Arch based but provides a very easy installation method, graphical installation method. So if you want to install Arch and get started with it, I suggest you install CachyOS because it has a easy installation method and you can get up and running in very few minutes. Now at the end, it is on you which Linux distribution you choose. It depends on how frequent update do you want, how stable system you want, and also depending on documentation that is available to you. So if you are currently a Windows user, I suggest you to not directly switch to Linux. First of all, get yourself familiarized with how system works, Linux system works, and terminal works by using WSL. WSL is a great place to start learning before you completely switch to Linux. So you get the idea of terminal and how to use it and how basic things in Linux system work. So after which you can move from Windows to Linux and start with a distribution of your choice. And with this we have come to an end. So I will see you in the next one. Keep watching and Linux.